Cape Bretoners are friendly people, but they can also be pretty cautious when it comes to trusting strangers who come from away. Still, the bureaucrats at Enterprise Cape Breton, a federal agency, put out the welcome mat when Ontario's Mike DiCenzo came to call. Mike is a born-again recycler, a tire retread king, and he got millions of dollars to set up a tire retread plant in Glace Bay. After all, DiCenzo seduced them with promises of jobs in a cleaner environment. But now, those same officials aren't bragging about the new jobs. They're diving for cover, while the police try to figure out what happened to all that money. Millions of burning tires light up the midnight sky. Last April, Saint-Amave, Quebec, right outside Montreal. The smoke, the fire, the mud, the mess. It was the devil's own brew.
You're getting too hot in there.
And Hagersville in Ontario was the same thing. In the aftermath of both fires, the public demanded action. Recycling became the new buzzword, and the government started prying money loose for projects. But there's one man in Ontario who could give lessons to the born-again recyclers. Is there any difference in the piles here?
Well, these particular piles of tires are just going to be graded.
Meet Mike DiCenzo, king of the tire jockeys. No one in Canada knows more about old tires than he does, and no one is better at getting governments to cough up money for them.
I would be an island tire, which is a tire that we export into Central America, into the Caribbean.
Mike's been in the business for 15 years. He sells old tires to third world countries. Mike's not just an exporter, he makes retreads too. But like his customers, he's very leery about using that word.
It's always a car that my wife owns that we want to put the tires on. It's always a car that I'm only going to have for the next 6 months and I'm getting rid of it. So give me the cheapest form of tire product you have.
But there is a stigma about retreads. You won't even use the word retread.
I try to stay away from the word retread because if you use the terminology, it's always an exercise, an explanation you have to give somebody. I'm not in the business.
Mike got $100,000 from the Ontario government for this plant on the outskirts of Toronto. He also gets paid for taking tires from 2 big Toronto dumps. He stores them neat as a pin in these trailers. He can't get away with piling up tires the way they did in Hagersville. Except it all boils down to the same thing. He runs a parking lot for old tires. And the pressure is on to get rid of them. That's the hard part. DiCenzo exports them all over the world. But sometimes the deals go sour, and he just has to make do. It says no dumping here, but no one pays attention to signs. Most of these tires are DiCenzo's, and he paid a man called Mario Colucci to take these tires away. Colucci said he had a deal to export them to China, but this sure isn't China. These tires only got as far as North Toronto. In fact, thanks to Mike and Mario, there are trailer companies all over Ontario stuck with trailers full of Mike's tires. Mario Colucci also rented 25 trailers from Mike Yang, and this is what Mike found when he got them back.
I cannot do my business. All my trailer for rental is stuck here. Plus, I got this big pile of tires. What I'm going to do with them? I cannot burn them. I cannot give it away.
Now the Minister of the Environment has ordered him to turn his nice little trailer business into a waste disposal site. But Mike DiCenzo doesn't have much sympathy for these guys. As far as he's concerned, those tires are history, and today's game is recycling. That's why Mike says retreads are the answer. DiCenzo once had a retread plant in this factory in Brantford. He called it Technotread, and he got over $500,000 in government grants to set it up. But it's a tough business. DiCenzo's company went bankrupt in 1989, and now he has a little trouble remembering all the details. In Brantford,
Yes.
you got $197,000 from the federal government.
Yes.
And how much of that did you have to pay back?
None of that is repayable. That is just an outright grant.
I thought it was a loan.
No, it isn't.
So
It's.
how much of it was an outright grant?
I guess if you, maybe the interpretation is the situation. It may have been a loan paid over a period of time. $197,000, in fact, was a term loan of 10 years, 5 or 10 years. It's been so long, you already got me confused about it. And yes, none of that money was, in fact, paid back.
DiCenzo also received $263,000 from the provincial government. Just over $200,000 of that was still owing when his company went under, and both governments have shrugged their shoulders and written off the money.
We paid back portions of that amount, yes. The Ontario government loan was actually, should have been paid back on the sale of the assets. And unfortunately, the two parties that had access to the money ensured that the Ontario government never got a cent.
Well, it wasn't a big laugh for the government, and probably not for the unsecured creditors either. They lost $700,000. But DiCenzo doesn't call it a failure.
The bank and the main guarantor at the time had said, no, we didn't want to proceed with the operation. My choice was, thank you very much, I'm still going on, and that I did.
Yes, he did. Mike had heard about a new set of grants. Enterprise Cape Breton was giving out money, and DiCenzo knew he had a market in Nova Scotia. The poorer the province, the better a place to sell retreads. And what better place to start than Glace Bay, where jobs are scarce as trees, and where you can pick up a lonesome old mining building for a song. This building behind me is Mike DiCenzo's new retread plant in Glace Bay. Now, just 3 days before the '88 federal election, Enterprise Cape Breton announced they were giving him $2.2 million to fix it up and buy some new equipment. This happened just as his Brantford business was sliding into receivership. When this man heard the news, he was furious. Gerald Holmes runs a retread plant in New Glasgow, 280 kilometers away from DiCenzo's new plant. Of 15 passenger retread plants in the Maritimes, his is the only one that's survived. He isn't wasting any of that famous Nova Scotia hospitality on Mike DiCenzo.
Here I am producing 1,200 tires per week. I'm getting rid of them, but I have a hard enough time getting rid of them. And here he's coming in and wants to produce, so he's saying 2,500, 3,000 tires per week for the Maritime provinces. It's just, that'll be the next one gone by the wayside.
The fact that he produces a product with probably garbage that I throw away, and to him that's a product that he likes to market. I mean, it's a 30, 35-year-old operation that works under an antiquated system.
Plenty of people agreed with Mike, including some important Tories. Joe Stewart, a Tory power broker known as Big Daddy all over Nova Scotia, is one of Gerald Holmes' fellow businessmen in New Glasgow. Mike DiCenzo got his grant for Technotred when Stewart was on the board of ACOA, the federal government's Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. ACOA is now ECB's parent corporation.
We had a meeting with him, and he says, different process altogether, no competition to me. If it's anything, it's a better, maybe even better process than what I really have. Not the other way, but that's what he said anyway. And
So he didn't give you any support?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. In fact, Stewart was far more helpful to Mike DiCenzo. Here at a meeting in his office over his pizza parlor, Stewart told 3 people who have talked to us that he helped Mike DiCenzo draw up his business plan. Stewart denies that story. He says that all he did was make a phone call. And when Gerald Holmes contacted his MP, Elmer MacKay, in 1988... He's a cabinet minister. What about his kind of support? In fact, he's the minister responsible for ACOA.
He wrote us one letter back and just said everything was finalized, and that's it. And as if it's going through.
So you got no sympathy from Elmer MacKay either?
Definitely not.
As recently as May of this year, MacKay defended the Technotred grant before a parliamentary standing committee. As he said himself, simply because a person makes a failure in one attempt at a business, or perhaps in the same sector, it does not mean the person cannot learn from his mistakes and go on and do a better job the next time. And MacKay said he was still not sure that DiCenzo bore any responsibility for the problems of the Brantford plant. Mr. DiCenzo has those detractors who say he was part of a failed operation. If it can be proven conclusively, and if there has been a mistake made, I will take full responsibility. If he needed to find any proof, he could have started with his own files. Gerald Holmes' accountant wrote him in 1989. And if MacKay or Enterprise Cape Breton officials had gone to bankruptcy court, they could have found these documents a year ago. The taxpayers gave you $500,000 for your last business. It went into receivership. Why should the taxpayers give you another $2.2 million now?
Once you've gotten some money, and things did not necessarily work out 100%, it means that you never go back to the well or go back to the table again and try again. You just call it quits, and that's the end of it.
And talking about taxes, Mike DiCenzo still owes the town of Brantford nearly $3,000, over $1,000 of that in 1988. But in the same year, he did find $1,000 to kick into the campaign of the Tory candidate in Cape Breton, East Richmond, in the federal election.
You know, if he's in Ontario and done a good business in Ontario, everything above board, he deserves to go anywhere in Canada, you know. But when he's up there, and I think he took a lot of people, I think governments he took, you know, it's your dollars and my dollars, taxes. You wonder why we have to pay so much tax money.
Holmes is on slippery ground when he's talking about tax dollars. He had to pay the federal government over $500,000 after being charged with sales tax evasion. Shouldn't you feel a little more sympathy for Mike DiCenzo? I mean, you've had your troubles, he's had his troubles. Shouldn't you feel more sympathy for a fellow retreader?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think there's room for him and I in the Maritime Provinces.
It's not surprising Gerald Holmes was so worried. When Enterprise Cape Breton first announced the grant, there were lots of big promises. 120,000 tires produced a year, 43 jobs in the first year, another 110 jobs in the second year. DiCenzo delayed opening the plant for months, and then 10 weeks after it opened in April, it closed again. It had produced 2,000 tires. With $2 million in grants, that's $1,000 a tire, and it had only employed 15 people, with their wages subsidized by the provincial government. When we talked to Mike DiCenzo back in August, he said the shutdown was just temporary. At first, he said it was just because he couldn't get the tread rubber he needed.
The tactic of maybe of laying employees off a raw material shortage is standard in Eastern Canada, I guess.
How do you mean it's a standard
Well,
tactic?
it's a system where if you don't have raw material, you can't necessarily produce anything.
But is it really raw material, or is it
No,
the
it's
fact that
definitely
you were holding Cape Breton, Enterprise Cape Breton to ransom over this, that you wanted more money from them?
No, they don't owe me any more money.
40,000. Maybe not cash exactly, but he did want officials to lift a mortgage on his equipment so he could get a bank loan.
Primarily it was rubber shortage, but it obviously served at a moment to express a point that, you know, with the scenarios of the up and down situation with this project, I want to conclude it. I want to know it's reality. I want to know that everything's done and everything's finished.
If closing the plant was a tactic, it failed miserably. ECB had been going over Mike's receipts for this equipment with a fine-tooth comb. The Ontario Provincial Police were in Cape Breton last June asking questions about Mike DiCenzo's financing, and the RCMP had been involved as well, months before Enterprise Cape Breton itself requested the case be investigated. 2 weeks ago, Elmer MacKay, the minister responsible for Enterprise Cape Breton, announced a formal RCMP investigation.
You'll have to get your answers when we have some certainty about what happens when all this is over.
Yeah, but Mr. MacKay, we tried for 3 months to get the answers before the RCMP.
We'll try and get them now.
Well, maybe let's hope the RCMP has better success than you did.
Did you stop the payment after the committee, you said?
Yeah,
The day of the committee.
I told...
What happened to the money?
Well, you've been working on this for 3 months. Surely you must know by now.
MacKay credits the New Democratic Party with forcing the police investigation.
And they suggested to me that this was a problem and that maybe I should take a really hard look at it. I said I will.
I read the committee transcript today, and you said you'd look at it. So after that, you stopped the...
Yeah, I told my officials not to advance any more funding until we got to the bottom of it.
Don't you think that's because the Fifth Estate was doing the investigation?
Are you sure the Fifth Estate was the least of my concerns then or now? We did
For
the right
months
thing.
now, the Fifth Estate has been trying to get MacKay or ECB officials to explain DiCenzo's financing and how he ever got the money in the first place. They refused to talk to us. But according to Elmer MacKay, we've got it all wrong. He's the one who can't get a word in edgewise.
What's so
problematic about this particular story?
Well, Stevie, if you'd stop talking, maybe somebody could answer.
Well, I want you to talk.
That's pretty obvious. So maybe we'll see you later. Hello.